Okay. Yeah, so I want to start by correcting this definition of vague Q number that I gave because I was trying to cram two ideas together and it came out wrong. So
Okay.
here, just to restate the wrong definition, here I was claiming that it's an algebraic integer in the rational numbers, sorry, in the in the complex numbers,
Yeah.
such that all its Galois conjugates have absolute value q to the m/2 for some fixed integer m. So so that wasn't quite right because, I mean, one way that you could begin to sense that maybe it's not right is that, well, it's asking for a little bit much to expect to have algebraic integers like this with incredibly small absolute values, like when m is really large and negative. I mean, maybe it's even possible.
Again, when m is large and
when m is small and when m is large and negative, when m is negative, I don't know. It doesn't sound good.
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. I was buying it for a moment, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, that's another interesting math question.
Yeah.
But anyway, that turns out that that's not what's actually called for.
Okay.
So I'm going to take over the controls for a second here.
Okay, you can do that. I don't have to worry about seating it.
Nope, I think I'm the boss.
Sure.
So this is the real definition. So an algebraic number is or you could just say a complex number is a vague Q number of weight m if all its Galois conjugates have absolute value q to the m/2. But it doesn't need to be an algebraic integer itself. It just needs to become an algebraic integer when you multiply it by a big enough power of q.
Okay.
So in particular, for example, you can take a vague Q number. So a vague Q number is a vague Q number of weight m for some m. That's what a vague Q number is.
So you could, sorry. I think I want to keep the quantifier in A, but the quantifier in B could be just as well, could be a universal quantifier instead of existential.
No. Well, no, I mean, it only becomes an algebraic integer when n is really large, potentially large enough.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was saying, sorry. I was totally misreading what I was quantifying over. I was thinking it was one of the conjugates. Okay, never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the point here with this correct definition is that you can take a vague Q number and you can divide it by Q, and it will still be a vague Q number. It may not still be an algebraic integer, but it will still be a vague Q number. And that's
okay.
good.
So it's an algebraic integer up to Q.
Yeah, up to powers. Yeah, up to multiplying by Q, powers of Q. And you can see why that's sort of a good idea, because the Tate motive, the inverse of the Lefschetz motive, that's gonna correspond to the number Q inverse. So if you take a motive and you tensor it with the Tate motive, you remember the whole point of this is that simple motives are supposed to correspond to vague Q numbers. So if you take a simple motive and you tensor it with the Tate motive, I think it's supposed to stay simple, and the number gets multiplied by 1/Q. So you can make simple motives with very tiny numbers.
Okay. Yeah, that seems okay. That seems okay.
And then the last little thing is that there is this concept I mentioned called effective motives, which are the ones that actually sit inside as summands of varieties, sort of before you start tensoring with a Tate motive. So
Yes.
for effective motives, the numbers you get will actually be algebraic integers. That's another fact. So it's just
Okay.
when you start tensoring with a Tate motive that you get these things that are algebraic integers only up to a power of q. So that's the deal.
Okay. Okay.
And you can see that you can multiply two VQ numbers and you get a VQ number.
Yeah. Well,
And
I mean, that sounds plausible. I thought about that a little bit. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
because the absolute values multiply and because the product of algebraic integers is an algebraic integer.
Yeah, sounds reasonable.
Yeah. And the absolute Galois group of the rationals acts on these VQ numbers. That's again evident from these clauses. And so then, so the simple isomorphism classes of simple motives correspond to equivalence classes of VQ numbers where you mod out by this Galois group action.
All right, say that again. What?
The whole sentence?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the Galois group, absolute Galois group of the rationals acts on VQ numbers.
I guess it does in an evident way. Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Go ahead.
Yep. And so the goal of all this baloney was to describe the set of isomorphism classes of simple motives.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just to repeat the final punchline,
Yeah.
those correspond to equivalence classes of AQ numbers where they're equivalent if they're related by this Galois group action. So that's
yeah, and that equivalence is also just this conjugation thing, being different embeddings of.
right. Yeah, and you can see that conjugation thing gets along with multiplication of the VQ numbers.
Again, I only thought about that a little bit, but okay. Okay.
So yeah, so that's that. And so just to remind you, there's like this thing that you wanted to be left as a puzzle, which was
Yes.
the tensor product structure of the.
Yeah, I mean, you're already giving away hints about it, but
I'm dropping hints left and right. I'm telling you lots of crud.
Sure.
It's designed to pave the way for that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, okay. So one of the questions I asked in email was just trying to clarify what you're talking about here, and just see how well I'm following. So you could also just restate this by, if I'm following, because you could define a VQ number of weight m, whatever, to be you could define it to be a mnemonic integer coefficient polynomial, which is the minimal polynomial of the thing that you're calling the VQ number, right? Because that's monic irreducible monic integer coefficient polynomial, and that would have algebraic integer roots, and it would automatically be exactly correspond to that equivalence relation, right? I mean, maybe it's not even
right.
I don't know whether it's convenient to think of it this way, but
yeah. So it has to have this property that all its
yes,
roots have the same absolute value.
That's right. Right. It's just with a mere property. There's not like anything extra other than just that property. Once you figure out a good way to say that property. So that was my question, and it sounds like you're going along with that.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know how elegantly that property can be stated, but you can just state it very blatantly, if not elegantly. Okay.
Yeah, and that's a good way to think about it for the following reason. So the way you actually should think about this stuff, maybe you're gonna shut me up, but the way you should think about this stuff is that the Frobenius acts on the cohomology, like the Étale cohomology, the nice any of these nice cohomologies of a variety over FQ. And so you have this vector space, which is the cohomology, all the cohomology groups, I guess, with this Frobenius acting on it, and that will have a minimal polynomial. That linear transformation will have some minimal polynomial whose roots are these VQ numbers.
Right. So it's very interesting. Can you say that again? Now that I think I know vaguely where you're going, can you restate that? Restate that again? Something about cohomology, the Frobenius.
So if you have one of these varieties we're talking about over FQ,
yes,
it has a cohomology.
A variety that's sort of getting ready to become a motive or to be chopped up into motives or something like
right, yeah. So they're smooth projective varieties.
Okay.
That's what they are, to be specific, over FQ. And so then the Frobenius acts on the cohomology.
Frobenius. Right. I guess, yeah. Yeah.
And
the variety has some sort of cohomology, you said. So you said?
Yeah, so any one of these.
It may have a lot of cohomologies, but you specifically mentioned Étale cohomology.
Yeah, any of the, this probably would be true for any of these vague cohomology theories.
I have a feeling it's probably more relevant in this context for the Étale cohomology, but I'm not sure, but go ahead, yeah?
Yeah. So
that.
Yeah, yeah, and well, okay.
But you said something about a minimal polynomial in the action.
Yeah. So well, I'm being a little sloppy, and I'm starting to want to correct that, but I'll just charge ahead. So
okay.
What I had said was that that Frobenius will have some minimal polynomial. I mean, just like any linear transformation on a vector space does.
So we're thinking that Étale cohomology is a vector space over something.
Right, and I could fill in exactly what like over the, I think we're doing it often over the rationals here. Yeah. Whatever. We'll focus. We'll get it to that, and it's important, but I guess we'll think about that in a second. Probably over that.
And the Frobenius is going to have
probably over the L-adic numbers, to be honest. But
could be, yeah.
But anyway, this minimal polynomial is always a monic polynomial. It expresses some power of your transformation in terms of linear combinations of the earlier powers. So its roots are these vague Q numbers of weight M. Well, of weight M, if we look at the cohomology of sort of degree M, whatever you call it, of weight M, they might call it.
Yeah.
But the point is that your way of like getting rid of the Galois action by just looking at the polynomial rather than its roots is actually right on track, in the sense that the way you get these roots in the first place is you look at this minimal polynomial of the Frobenius. So basically what you did is you sort of unveiled what was secretly going on here.
All right, I guess I should, I guess I'm really trying to rely on using this video recording as my notes, but I should really write down something nevertheless. So let me just
I can stop sharing this thing and then I can, if it,
no, I think that's okay. I just need to just take a minute to try to remember how this notebook works. What am I doing? Exit full screen. Baez, untitled page, new page. All right, Monday, June 20th, 4:50 p.m. And okay, and now what? Okay, I just want to write down some very vague summary of what you said, which is something about the action of the Frobenius on a Tal cohomology. I mean, right, there's all sorts of levels at which you could be confused and or enlightened by this. You know, even if you had no idea what was going on, you could use this as clues. But I think I actually already have a lot of previous clues that I can use to build a top of with this one. So, okay, so the action of Frobenius on the A tau cohomology has minimal, I always get confused between minimal and characteristic polynomials, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Has minimal polynomial of a Q number flavor.
mm-hmm.
You know, so that sounds like something I'll really have to go home and think about. Okay. So I sort of had to interrupt just so I could write stuff down there, but now I'm sort of ready to proceed. Were you finishing sentences or paragraphs or anything?
No, I guess I'm eager to get onto the table the tensor product structure, the monoidal structure on this category of motives, but I don't. But since you wanted to say it yourself,
you're eager, but you can wait. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think that would work for me. If you're really desperate to say it at some point, that'd be okay.
At some point, I'm going to have to say it. I can't.
Sure.
That's the rest of my life this way. Yeah.
Sure, but I'm going to. But I think I want to say some stuff now.
Okay.
So again, I think I was supposed to send you a whole bunch of questions in email. I think I only wound up sending you 3 questions. I just mentioned 2 of them, and I have a feeling you just answered 2 of them. Is that right? What were the 2 questions? One was about the minimal polynomial.
Yep.
No, maybe that was just the one question. Maybe that was the only one I asked so far. Yeah, okay. Maybe that was just the one question. But so the second question was a question I probably don't really want you to answer right now, but I just want to mention that question again and maybe modify or amplify the question. So I have a feeling that it was in these discussions that you said something about, it might not have been, it might have been an email, but at some point, somewhere, you mentioned something, you said, I don't know, you're just coming up, it's sort of interesting the way, how do you pronounce his name? Alain Cohn or something like that?
Uh-huh.
It's interesting the way he, I don't know, embraces or is not scared of topos theory or something like that. I forget how you phrase it. And so you just mentioned that in passing, and I neglected to ask you about what you meant by it. And so that was my question. My question was, what did you mean by that? And then, I suggested, I think I suggested various things that you could have meant by it, but I think I failed to suggest one. So there's this person, I think their name is Olivia Caramello or something like that.
Yeah, she's part of the answer to that question. So
yeah. Well, it's also possible. I wish I understood exactly what her work is, because the stuff that I'm going to talk about right now, I'm not sure how related it is to Caramello's stuff, but maybe we'll find out. And maybe if you do try to give more of an answer to the question about Cohn, then maybe, yeah, as you say, maybe it has something to do with Caramello. I don't know. Anyway, so let me try to remember what the third question was.
wait, I want to say, so you don't want me to answer the question about Cohn? That's ridiculous.
I started out saying right up front, I said, I don't want the answer to this question. But what
I thought you were leading up to some actual math question.
Oh, I am.
I don't mind not answering a math question, but I'm going to say this regardless. So all that Caramello has to do with this, that as far as I know, is for sure, is that Caramello hung out in Paris at IHES for a while, and she managed, just from my
sorry, what is IGS? I don't think I've heard of IGS.
IHES? That's,
oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said, it sounded to me like you were saying IGS, but you were saying IGS.
IHES, yeah, right. So you've heard of that thing. So that's
sure.
Yeah, the Institute for High Etudes Scientifiques. Yeah. So,
well, did I know that was? Oh, anyway, go ahead.
Doesn't matter. It's
obviously that I knew what the H stood for, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So anyway, she's very good at getting people interested in topos theory, apparently, and so she got both Alain Cohn and this guy Laforgue to, I don't know if she got them to do it, but around when she was there, they started saying how important topos theory was and started using it. Well, at least Cohn started using it in his work. So
that's
Cohn
interesting. Yeah, go ahead. I was going to mention the cyclic topos. Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now this is, interestingly, but he didn't really, I don't know what he did about that, but lately he's been
it's very interesting from a topos theoretic viewpoint, but go ahead, yes.
Yeah. So I don't remember him ever saying anything about that, but he's been trying to make up sites and toposes for proving the real Riemann hypothesis. So he has something that he calls the arithmetic site, and he's actually probably tried a number of different things to.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, maybe I should find out what he was doing. I thought I was supposed to. I still think I'm supposed to find out what Caramello is doing, because I had the impression that Caramello actually was doing more than just teaching Cohn.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's definitely doing her own thing. But in terms of motives, the stuff I know about Cohn working on motives is mainly working with Matilda Marcoli and someone Consani, another woman named Consani, and they have a bunch of papers struggling towards the Riemann hypothesis, and some of them are involving topos theory.
Well, then it could be that that's what I'm trying to reinvent. I don't know, but okay. So yeah, okay, so that is actually an interesting answer to the question. So that's still only two questions. There's still a third question.
Yeah, I figure I'm allowed to answer like cultural questions, like cultural knowledge questions, like the one I just did. It's only.
I'm not sure about that.
Even that you have to like regulate your intake of. Okay, I thought it was like actual math facts that was the.
I count that as an actual math fact or something. I don't know. But you're allowed to violate. You're allowed to, violate any regulation.
I'm gonna have to sometimes. But anyway, I'm okay. So what's number 3?
You're allowed to violate any of the regulations. I'm allowed to get really, really angry when you did.
Yay! Everything's allowed. Okay.
So, right. What is the third question? The third question I asked is. Right. The way I phrased it was that I was trying to understand how you were using the term Galois representation, because it sounded like you said something like this. It sounded like you said something like, I'm going to tell you, you being me, or I being you, or something like that. I'm going to tell you what motives are. And then you tell the story, and then it turns out that these motives, they include special ones that you call zero-dimensional motives or something. And maybe those are exactly or almost exactly known under another name as Galois representations or something like that. I think you said something like that.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure. There may be like extra fine print.
Sure.
Which Galois representations count?
I thought it might be the other way around. That it might be.
These ones that do the cultural knowledge. The ones that do count are called art and motives. But I'm not claiming to tell you right now what the.
Okay. But okay. So my vague question went something like this. Well, on the one hand, you said that it sounds like you're saying that there are special simple motives, whatever, that are honest to God Galois representations in some sense. I won't try to decide exactly what honest to God means yet. But and then on the other hand, you sort of seem to say, on the other hand, we're supposed to think of arbitrary simple motives or arbitrary motives as being sort of Galois representations in a larger sense, in a motivic sense, in a motivic Galois sense, that there's supposed to be a motivic Galois group, which it sounds like you're distinguishing from this other thing that we're calling the Galois group. So you make it sound like, naively, I could be completely on the wrong track, but it sounded like you were saying that there's this possibly Tanakianly reconstructed thing that we're calling, we want to be in a position, and sometimes we are in simple situations, we can apply Tanakian reconstruction to obtain this thing that we're going to call a motivic Galois group, and it's going to be some kind of actual group. But on the other hand, some of its representations are going to be actual representations of an actual known group called the Galois group or something like that. So it sounds like you're saying the Galois, it sounds like saying some of the motivic Galois group representations, some of the motivic Galois representations, in other words, the motives, some of those are representations of this other pre-motivic Galois group or unmotivic Galois group. And so, I mean, that kind of relationship where you have one group and some of its representations, form the representations of another group. That's kind of a quotient group situation. So it sounded to me naively like you're saying that you've got this motivic Galois group, and it sounded like you're saying it's going to have a quotient group, which is this plain pre-motivic Galois group, because just some of the representations of this finer. Yeah, it sounds like you're saying there's some finer. It sounds like you're saying that the motivic Galois group is some finer group than this other thing that we're calling the premotivic Galois group, and that this premotivic Galois group is just the absolute Galois group of the field of definition. So yeah, I was distinguishing between, right, you've told me in this game, at the moment we have two fields involved. One we call the coefficient field. The other one, at the moment, I'm calling it the field of definition, the definition field, because it's the field over which the projective varieties that we're studying are defined. So I just call that the field of definition. So that field of definition has an absolute Galois. And it sounds to me like you're talking about.
All this sounds right. Yeah.
Okay. And then I was getting confused, right? Still part of my email question was something like, maybe we can go further and say that we're interested in taking the absolute Galois group of the field of definition, and then taking its representations over the coefficient field. And maybe those are these zero-dimensional Galois representations. But I wasn't at all confident that I didn't have, I thought I might have too many level steps in there for that to be.
That sounds, I don't understand this stuff well enough, but that sounds
worth checking out.
Yeah, it sounds like how it should go. No, I mean, it sounds, yeah, what field are these representations of the Galois group?
Yeah, I always get confused by things like this, but okay, yeah, okay.
I can't imagine it could be the field of definition. I think it has to be something more like the coefficient. It has to be the coefficient field, I think.
That's what I thought at first, but then I started worrying about funny level steps. But okay, so this was all just preliminary. Now I'm going to try and actually talk about something stuff, and probably this next stuff is probably just going to be a very lame attempt to reinvent whatever it is that Cohn is doing. So I'm going to try to start talking about a bunch of toposes, and a bunch of toposes and a bunch of related categories, which maybe are like toposes or related to toposes in some way, some vague way. And so I'm taking a very doctrine-oriented viewpoint here. Again, just this idea that Cohn actually seems to be thinking in terms of theories, toposes as theories. I'm now creating all sorts of conspiracy theories about what he's doing. I don't. Yeah.
Why did you say he's treating them as theories? You just think that?
I'd have to go back and play the tape, but I thought you said something like, you made it sound like he was looking at classifying toposes for various kinds of commutative rings and stuff like that, which is an obvious thing to do. But I thought you used the word rings at one point. And from that, I extrapolated.
Oh, no, I didn't say that. All I said, which you're free to interpret as deeply as you want, is that he invented something called the arithmetic site.
Site. Well, that's interesting. All right. Well, that's interesting. Right, because there's a funny sort of duality between sight thinking and theory thinking. So, I mean, secretly they're morally equivalent, but there's funny different viewpoint. So yeah. So what am I trying to say here? Well, I'm saying that I'm going to be taking a very doctrinal viewpoint here.
Okay.
I'm going to take a very doctrinal viewpoint. And more particularly a belief doctrinal. But I mean, in some sense, the belief doctrine viewpoint is a very highbrow viewpoint, or you can label that, you can call that the highbrow viewpoint. Although, of course, in certain ways it wants to be very lowbrow. But in the discussion, presumably we're going to, not be we're not going to be doctrinaire about it. We're going to be jumping back and forth between all sorts of, I mean, we are going to be doctrinaire, but it's not going to be doctrinaire about being doctrinaire.
Doctrinal sounds less bad than doctrinaire.
That's why I like to use doctrinaire.
You were just saying doctrinal just recently, but okay, yeah.
I think you tried to introduce doctrinal or something like that. I don't know, but so I have a feeling I'm jumping back and forth between all sorts of different brow levels, up and down, and well, we'll see how it goes. Oh, did I say? But right. But what I meant to say was not just doctrinal, but belief doctrinal. Maybe I did remember to say that.
Yep.
It's very possible that we'll be using belief ideas well. So this is a different belief doctrine than the doctrine that I very often talk about, that we sometimes call the two-rig doctrine, you know, where you just have a tensor product and it's not necessarily a Cartesian tensor product and so forth. And it's related to algebraic geometry in very interesting ways. But there's this other belief doctrine, the geometric belief doctrine, whose theories are the geometric theories, also known as the Grothendieck toposes. And that's also related to algebraic geometry, and it's related to the other doctrine in very interesting ways. But it's a different belief doctrine. So you sort of have to try to, you know, we've done a very sketchy job of introducing the idea of belief and belief doctrines in the context of that other belief doctrine. But now you have to try to somehow use everything that you learned there about the idea of belief doctrine, but you have to adapt it to this other belief doctrine. So, you know, you have to magically somehow not get confused between the things that are different between the two belief doctrines. Magically, or maybe sometimes we can actually explain what the difference is. So, but I mean, like, so one of the things that happens is, again, so in some sense, the most important thing about the belief idea is that, you know, it's not just a matter of believing in facts, believing in properties or something like that. It's also believing in things, believing in structures, and believing in stuff. And, you know, maybe the hierarchy even goes higher than that, you know, when you reach the 33rd degree or something like that. But the simplest thing, perhaps, to know about the belief doctrine in the context of geometric theories, aka Grothendieck toposes, is that believing in a property of the model is basically just being a sheaf for a certain Grothendieck topology or Lovier-Tierney topology. So, you know, the pre-thieves are the pre-believers, the skeptics, or whatever you call them, the potential believers. Did we ever work out the right terminology? They're like the marks, but right, you don't. It's not until after you.
That's not a very religious.
No, it is. It is.
Marks?
Yeah.
Oh. You don't mean like the Gospel of Mark, or sorry, the Gospel of Mark.
No. No, I mean, you know, when you round up the prospective, the marks are the prospective believers.
I know, but they probably have some more polite name for them as well.
Oh.
More high-flown terminology. But
yeah.
So then you can talk about them without. You can talk about them that way without them while they're still around.
Sure. Yes. Right. Exactly. Right. I just can't think of what that word is. Yeah, you have the prospective believers, which are the pre-thieves, and then you have the believers, which are the sheaves. But that's only at the property level, which is just like, the tip of the iceberg. There's the structure and stuff, and that's more complicated, and that's not discussed as much. So I can't give you familiar names for what the believers and things like that. But nevertheless, for the simple case of believing in properties of the models, it's going to be sheaves for topology. So, okay. So let's think about this. So let me give you an example of a topos. On the other hand, the fact that this is a this category is a topos seems like a bit of an accident. It may actually be more important to think of it as some other kind of category. So this first category that I'm thinking about is one that you and I'm pretty sure you and I have talked about before. I'm trying to remember what we call them. We may have called them something like zeta types, or zeta. We may have distinguished between zeta structure types on one hand and zeta stuff types on the other hand. Or I don't know, maybe call them Dirichlet stuff types or Dirichlet structure types. They're basically a kind of categorified Dirichlet series. In fact, right, it's actually the same category as Weil species. Yeah, it's a little funny giving them a different name. Right. Okay. So it's actually just Weil species, but it's got this different tensor product on it, which we call Dirichlet convolution or categorified Dirichlet convolution or something like that.
Yep.
And then theoretically, I should struggle to recall everything that you and I thought about and talked about that stuff, but I'm not sure how well I remember all that stuff. We could probably reconstruct a lot of it, but I don't think we have to right at the moment. But so all right, let me mention a couple of other categories floating around here. So one of them is monoids with respect to this categorified Dirichlet. Let's say commutative monoids with respect to this categorified Dirichlet convolution.
I don't have a good sense for what they're like. Why do you care about them?
Well,
what are some examples of them?
So one example of them is free commutative monoids on those. Well, but let me also mention something. So let's see. Even before we get into examples here, let me mention something about this. So this is a little bit abstract nonsense before getting into the examples, but I think it's okay. I mean, it'll help me if I can remember how it goes. So how does it go? When you start with a completely arbitrary, pretty arbitrary symmetric monoidal tensor product. And then you take the commutative monoids with respect to that. Then originally that was just a tensor product, but now just automatically by virtue of sticking with the commutative monoids with respect to that tensor product has now become the coproduct. Is that right?
Yep.
AKA the sum. So that's sort of interesting. That's already slightly suggestive. So that's saying that the objects, these commutative monoids with respect to categorified Dirichlet convolution, that their sum corresponds to their Dirichlet convolution. And that's slightly interesting because of the fact that, right, that's what you're supposed to do with for example, zeta functions, right? That's how zeta functions as a passage between the zeta function process as a passage from varieties of some kind to these categorified Dirichlet series, categorified zeta function. That right, it tends to take some of projective varieties to Dirichlet convolution. So by taking the commutative monads with respect to Dirichlet convolution, we're getting this to line up a little bit. We're taking sum to sum. And that's possibly a very slight hint of being on the right track with something. Nothing deep yet, but okay. So those, Weil species that we were just talking about, those are species on a groupoid, the groupoid of finite sets and bijections, right? Okay, but now there's a couple of other pre-sheaf categories lying around here that we're going to think about. So, well, but let's also remember that in that category of well, okay, right. I mean, I was also supposed to perhaps give you some examples. So, examples of these commutative monads. So let's think about the Riemann I can't remember. What did I say, like 10 seconds ago for the name of these things? I mean, I gave a bunch of very sloppy terminology like categorified Dirichlet series and what did I call them? Oh, I guess zeta types or something, perhaps zeta structure types. Right, we may eventually be interested in the zeta stuff types, but those probably wouldn't form a topos. Those might form sort of higher topos or something like that. Let's just stick for now to the zeta structure types. And so those are set valued pre-sheaves rather than pre-stacks or something like that. Just set valued pre-sheaves on this site category that just has bijections from morphisms. So we have zeta stuff types. So in particular, we have the Riemann zeta stuff type. Sorry. I was supposed to say structure type, and I said stuff type twice just right now. So I was supposed to say structure type, but actually I'm supposed to say it, what's that fancy word for not saying something? Subvocate, I don't know, subvocalize or something. So I'm just supposed to say them zeta types, right? And the unspoken assumption is that they are structure types rather than stuff types. Okay, so there's the Riemann zeta type, categorification of the Riemann zeta function. And we understand what that is, or at least we used to, right? It's you probably have some better name than semi-simple in this context or something like that, but I'll say it's the structure. It's the structure of being a semi-simple finite commutative ring.
Yep.
And at some point we calculated that, when you sort of decategorify that in the usual way, it just gives the Riemann zeta function as a formal Dirichlet series or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I hope there's no particularly annoying glitch there involving the empty set. I think that's okay. And yeah, and again, there's something entertaining about the way that this structure type ends up being the Riemann, a categorification of the Riemann zeta function. right? Because it's not completely trivial, right? You do this funny calculation involving the order morphisms of finite field.
Yep.
Works out some seemingly miraculous cancellation way to be, just all these coefficients are 1. But of course, if I really understood it, then it would be somehow obvious or something. And is it so? Okay, so I'm hoping that that is a commutative monoid, yes. And moreover, I'm hoping that it's actually a free commutative monoid. I'm hoping that it is the free commutative. I'm hoping that the idea of free commutative monoid makes perfectly good sense. If there's a forgetful functor that has a left adjoint, and we call that left adjoint the free thing. And so what is it free on? Well, I'm hoping that, it's just free on the structure of being a finite field, right? The things we're calling semi-simple things, those are finite products of finite fields or something like that. So there's a million details to check here, but this is what I think is going on.
So then there would be like all these Euler factors. There'd be like being a finite field, P elements.
Yes.
And then the free commutative monoid on that.
Yes.
And those all sort of somehow, like I guess, some level multiply together to give the Riemann zeta species.
Yes, and to some extent we can, we can and should do this localization thing and treat these as separate toposes, separate categories, whatever. And also, when you and I worked on this stuff some decades ago, some fractional number of decades ago, improper fractional number of decades ago, we probably did do a lot of this. Again, I can't remember exactly what we did, but it was certainly implicit and perhaps explicit in a lot of stuff that we did. Some things we're suggesting right now. But I'm not just trying to review all that stuff that we did in a very imperfect way. I'm trying to actually. The point is that we missed a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm trying to go further and try to follow up on the stuff that we missed. At least I missed. So and some of it is really obvious in retrospect, and or should be obvious if I actually understood. And again, one of the guiding principles that we should be following here, and I'm not sure to what extent I may have already suggested this, but I'm trying to actually say it out loud right now, even if I may have already suggested it at some point, is that whenever we run across one of these toposes, we should think about what it is the classifying topos for. I mean, you can think of that both syntactically and semantically. Syntactically in a very syntactic category way. That's a very theory way. But you can also think in terms of the models, and intuitively or less intuitively what the models are. And so we should really do that. But we've barely even gotten to the point where we have any toposes yet. So let's keep on going. Let's get some toposes. I mean, we do have some toposes. Right? We have one topos, but it's not really, right? I mean, the thing that makes it interesting
is this non-Cartesian tensor product.
Yeah.
Right.
And which then becomes co-Cartesian in some funny way when, right? It has something to do with the fact that this particular kind of free commutative monoid it is a kind of exponentiation process, right? There are other contexts where we're already familiar with the idea that free commutative monoids processes can be exponential flavored things.
Mhm.
And if you think about it, that's very much what's going on here. But it's, in some Dirichlet series way rather than some Maclaurin series way. But I think it works out. I mean, I also want to say that this thing that we're taking the exponential of, that's like, right, that's like the logarithm of the Euler factor, or as I sometimes call it, the Euler term. Possible I also call it sometimes some other things, but I'm not sure I can remember what those other names are. Yeah, I mean, it's so many things confuse me here. Like it seems so strange the way, this Dirichlet convolution, it's, basically a bilinear multiplication or categorified bilinear multiplication. But then somehow it itself becomes an addition-like operator. It becomes addition, it becomes a coproduct. And somehow I still have trouble grokking that. But of course, in some way it should be really simple because it's just, it just has to do with the way that exponentiation changes addition into multiplication. Secretly,
Okay.
something is going on like that in a very lowbrow way.
Mhm.
But we should also try to understand it in more highbrow ways, and we'll try to do that. So yeah, we don't really have interesting toposes yet, but we're going to try to have some very soon.
Okay.
And so let me try that. And again, we'll be flitting back and forth between local and global viewpoints. So as you say, sometimes we'll just be looking at the Euler factors. Sometimes we'll just be focusing on characteristic P. Other times we'll be sort of trying to combine all characteristics together. Sometimes we may try to incorporate character -1 into the story. That's probably connected with Archimedean primes and something like that. But I'm not going to worry about that yet. I mean, I think that's Conway's story. That -1 is sort of the Archimedean prime in a certain context. I'm not sure I'm describing that philosophy correctly, but I'm not worried about it. But there's a lot of interesting things to wonder there about how to, right? There are things that are rather trivial for non-Archimedean primes, and then if you try to do them for the Archimedean primes, then you've really got something. So what am I trying to say? So let's consider. Well, so we already, okay. So we could already say, let's take. Well, okay, here's one thing we could do. We could take a slice topos. We could take a slice topos. Like, let's take the slice topos of the Riemann zeta type.
Okay. Now that I've written about, yeah. Because wait a minute. Slice topos of the
Riemann zeta type.
Riemann zeta.
And then you could do it with any. You can keep on taking slice topos. You can keep on iterating the process taking slice topos. But go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, actually, no. I was thinking about something different. So there's this other thing. You can take the topos of let's see, there's the topos of Z sets. And there's you can think of it as like, there's the species of finite Z sets. And then that has a generating function, which is also, that has a Dirichlet generating function, which is also the Riemann zeta function. I'm probably getting it wrong here. Oh, sorry, I know what I'm. Sorry, let me sit. There's this. Sorry. Anyway, this is a. Maybe I won't talk about this, but
well, but it's very interesting. Let's but we don't have to talk about it right now, but it may be very important to incorporate into the discussion at some point. But also, you said that you have talked about it, or maybe you hinted that you've written about it, or something like that. Can you nail down the approximate decade when you talked about this?
it was around the same time when we were.
That's
talking
interesting.
about this
Does
other
it-
stuff. And
Does
I
it
wrote-
does it at all provoke you to use words like necklace or have you ever used the word necklace in discussions with Todd when he's talking
Yeah,
about
I
the
think
Lee
of that as very
operette and stuff like
Todd-esque.
that?
Yeah, I think of that as something Todd would say more than me, but
Yeah.
it's connected. Yeah. So what I was
Yeah.
talking about was you fix a Z set, you look at the species of Z sets over that one, and then you look at its generating function, and that will be a kind of zeta function, which I call the zeta function of a Z set. And a lot of times it looks more like a number theoretic zeta function. That Z action is coming from a Frobenius.
Right. Okay.
Then there are people who talk about like zeta functions for dynamical systems, and just like discrete time dynamical systems, and other ways of getting your hands on Z sets. And so a whole wad of these zeta functions are really just zeta functions of Z sets.
All right.
anyway,
that's
I've
very
never
interesting.
managed to completely connect that stuff up as well as I want with the stuff that you were just talking about.
Well, we probably really want to do this, but we have to proceed and see how this goes.
Yeah.
I'll give you one big wild guess.
Okay.
My vague idea is that those things coming from Z sets, that those are really just these zero-dimensional motives or something like that. But I'm not sure that's the right track. But I want to say that those are like the unmotivic Galois representations. But don't try to get that to make sense yet. So there's a couple of points again. Theoretically, I could or should go back and replay the tape and see if you used the word species where I thought you should have used the word topos, but it doesn't matter on one occasion, but on at least one occasion. But I got the feeling that you and me were both sort of invoking part of the general yoga of toposes or pre-sheaf toposes, or something like that. There's this general idea that, well, I'm not sure how general, what's the real generality it should be or something like that. But one of the minor things, minor conveniences to exploit is the idea that a slice topos of a pre-sheaf topos is itself a pre-sheaf topos. And in particular, it's the pre-sheaf over the category of points, I guess, in some sense, of the original pre-sheaf, the base pre-sheaf that you're slicing over. I hope I said that approximately correct. So I was exploiting that at some point when I was talking about this, slice topos of the Riemann zeta type. And I have a feeling you were exploiting it there too, possibly in a way that was secretly equivalent to what I was talking about. But anyway, I suspect some of that is what's
So it's the category of what? Of points of the, is that what you said? The category of
I did
points
say
of
that,
the-
yeah. I guess it's sometimes called the category of elements of a pre-sheaf.
Uh-huh.
A pre-sheaf, right? I mean,
Okay. Yeah, okay, that sounds, yeah.
the element
For
category.
some reason, sometimes element and point
Yeah, sure.
sound very different
Sure, but on the other hand, sometimes they should really sound the same.
Yeah.
You shouldn't even be able to hear the difference sometimes. But I have a feeling in some contexts, people also call that the action category or something. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly why. It might be Lovier or somebody. I remember it might be Lovier who either insists on using that terminology or insists on not using that terminology. I can't remember. Or doesn't care. So notice, we have already sort of started introducing a couple of somewhat relevant toposes. However, one thing that we haven't escaped beyond yet is that we're still dealing with pre-sheaf toposes where the site is a groupoid rather than a category.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've got to get beyond that. So for example, right, you could take either finite fields, or you could take, if you're localizing, you could say finite fields of characteristic P, localizing in some naive sense. Finite fields of characteristic P. Or you could even say finite fields. You could say finite FQ fields, fields equipped with an embedding from F sub Q. If you want to work with prime power, if you want to sort of work with prime power instead of just with prime, something like that. So you can take this. You can take the finite fields or the finite fields of characteristic P or something like that. To try to keep things simple for the moment, let's try to think about finite fields of characteristic P. And but now you have already two choices about how to make this into a category. First choice is make it into a category. Second choice is make it into a groupoid.
Mm-hmm.
And then in both cases, you can take the set valued functors. And actually, right, set valued functor and pre-sheaf are almost synonyms in certain contexts, except that, there's the op is the difference.
Yep.
And here we really do want the set valued functors. We want the covariant set valued functors. Typically, we're going to have a category of algebras of some kind. And we're going to take the set valued functors on that category of algebras. Whereas people who are trying to convince themselves that they're thinking geometrically often, flip things around. They often say that, instead of having this category of models, we're going to have this site category, which is sort of like a category of spectrums of those algebras or something like that. Spectrums of those commutative rings or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And they end up talking about pre-sheaves instead of about set valued functors. But right, you can probably do it either way. It's all a matter of convention.
Yep.
But maybe, maybe
Just
secretly.
depends how many ops you want to throw in.
Yes, yeah, but right. But maybe somebody's going to claim that secretly, even though it's completely equivalent, it actually completely puts you in a different frame of mind that allows you to do completely different things, thinking completely different ways. So at the moment, I find that I have to think in terms of the set valued functors on the model category. So yeah, so covariant. I'm sure something interesting or something peculiar would happen if you turn to the op around in this case, but I'm not going to do that. I'm looking at covariant set valued functors on this category of finite fields. And like I say, it could be the category of finite fields, or it could be the groupoid of finite fields.
Mm-hmm.
And so far, I think we've been sort of suggesting that we would use the groupoid of finite fields. But now it's really important to think about using the category of finite fields. And I think this is the point where it really starts getting interesting, starting in thinking of terms of, what is this the classifying topos for? What is this the classifying topos for?
Can you say?
Well, this could become well, so first of all, one philosophy about how to try to figure out what you have the classifying topos for is, you have a topos, try to look for things that are in it, models of other theories in it, and models of possibly other theories. They might not be other, they might actually be the theory itself. And if you get lucky, then you have discovered what it is the classifying topos for. So you start thinking about what kind of things there are in this category. And so there may be some, right? I mean, there's a very obvious object, very prominent object, which in some sense feels like it has to be a generating object in some sense for this topos, is the forgetful functor from the finite fields to sets. Thinking of finite fields as concrete things. Think of them as having underlying sets. So that concrete, by convention, the underlying set functor. That is a likely generating object for this topos. There must be some general principle right there, right? When you have a concrete category and you're taking the set valued functors from that, it sounds like I'm saying that object, that forgetful functor is likely to be, that forgetful functor from the concreteness is likely to be a generator for the topos. There's all sorts of uncertainties there, but probably the main one is what is generator supposed to mean. But anyway, so you've got this, generating object. So it's just an object in the topos. So it's just like, an abstract set. But then you start thinking about, well, what kind of structure is it carrying? What kind of geometric structure is it carrying? Geometric in the sense of parsing in the doctrine. And well, you notice that it's a commutative ring object. In fact, well, I mean, it certainly feels like it's a commutative field object, but how do you parse the concept of field in the doctrine? So I'm not quite sure, but we certainly know how to parse the concept of commutative ring in the doctrine. So it's some sort of commutative ring. So right, it's got to be some refinement of the theory of a commutative ring. In fact, it's got to be some sort of refinement of a commutative ring of characteristic P. We could parse characteristic P in the doctrine. So I have a feeling that we can parse the concept of being an algebraic extension, or more particularly being an algebraic extension of the, what do they call the minimal subfield of a field? Is it the characteristic field or something like that? It's just.
Yeah, I don't know. I know what you mean, but
isn't there some famous name for that I totally forget at the moment?
Oh, there probably is, but I don't know.
But in this case, if we're doing the characteristic P case, then that then we're talking about F sub P. We're talking about algebraic extensions of FP. So I'm guessing that concept parses, and I'm guessing that this is an example of that.
What concept parses?
The concept of being an algebraic extension of F sub P. So, and I Googled this. I Googled something like algebraic extensions of classifying topos for algebraic extensions of a field. And I basically got one hit on that. And it was from a long time ago. Somebody with a name like Michelle Cost or something like that. Is that
I don't know.
somebody should really look that up and see if that's related to this, and or if it's related to what Cohen is doing now or something like that. But
So these extensions of rings, or what?
Yeah, algebraic extent, algebraic extensions of a field. Well, right. We
What
can't
are
parse
they?
field. Every element in them satisfies a polynomial or something like that. I'm getting pretty sloppy here. If we were doing, plain old ordinary mathematics, then I would know what an algebraic extension of a field is. And then I'm sort of hoping I can parse that come close enough to parsing that in the doctrine that what I'm doing is legitimate in the doctrine. But right, I mean, in normal mathematics, you just say that an element in an extension ring, right? An extension ring just means that you have a homomorphism of rings. Even that's not enough information, because some people always turn around and call the domain the extension. But I mean the codomain is the extension. And you talk about it being an algebraic extension or a transcendental extension, or partially transcendental. What?
But anyway, but you're
purely transcendental and purely algebraic and some sort of mixture or something. Yeah.
But you're allowing the extended entity to be a commutative ring, not necessarily a field. Is that right? Because you can't quite say.
I would like to say it's a field. I just don't really know how to say it's a field.
Yeah.
Or I don't know the right way to say it's a field, or I don't know. I'm not sure how to say it's a field. I'm not sure of a good way to say it's a field. I'm not sure of any way to say it's a field. But if I could say, right, if in ordinary mathematics, if I say I have a field extension of a field, then I can ask for elements in the extension. I can ask of them whether they are transcendental or algebraic. And that's a yes/no question.
Okay.
So like a truth value or something like that. And so I'm hoping that there's some, Grothendieck topology or Liouville-Tierney. Well, so perhaps one thing we should think about is what would be the classifying topos for, all right, okay, so we are in for 6:30 p.m. today, so I'm being much more discursive than I wanted to be, not getting to a point very quickly, but we're really aiming for 6, it's almost 6, and we're really aiming for 6:30 p.m. Okay, just trying to help me try to organize, if not actually organize. So maybe we should think about right. In some cases, we can work, instead of playing this, reverse engineering game where we take the topos and try to guess what it's classifying topos for. There are also some cases where we can actually play the forward engineering game. We can state pretty clearly in the doctrine what we're taking the theory of, and then we have some theorems that tell us exactly what the syntactic category looks like. So we could take, for example, the classifying topos for, or we could take, the geometric theory of a commutative FP algebra. And if I understand correctly, if I'm not making too many stupid mistakes, then excessively stupid mistakes, then there's easy architect nonsense, which lets you pretty concretely describe that syntactic category, that geometric syntactic category. And one of the reasons it works is because the theory actually parses in a narrower doctrine, where, right, You don't need co-limits to express, you just need limits, and you just need finite limits. So it's really just a finite limits theory. And the syntactic category of that is just something like the finitely presented models or something like that, except I always get mixed up whether it's finitely presented models or finitely presented models op or something like that, right? And this is the case where you get op and it cancels out or something like that. So I think it ends up being, you take the category of finitely presented models and right, it could be that there's some fine print here, and I'm not actually supposed to say finitely presented. It could be that I'm actually supposed to say finitely xed, and I'm not quite sure what x is, but you know, or maybe it's like something like, I don't know, coherent or something like that. I don't know, but very tame. You take the category of tame models of the theory. I think it ends up in this case being the finitely presented.
I think so, because there's a Levier theory for these.
Oh, that's right. This is even better than a finite limits theory. This is a finite products theory. So it really is just a Levier theory, right? And the syntactic category for that is just the free, finitely generated free commutative rings. But then we'd want to, you know, so that's a Kleisli category, a category of free algebras. But then you take the not necessarily free algebras, which is an Eilenberg-Moore category. Is that what it's called? Yeah, an Eilenberg-Moore category. And that's just the arbitrary finitely present. I think that's just the arbitrary finitely presented algebras of this Levier theory. And then just take and that is the syntactic. Well, again, I think it's with the op in it. I think that is the syntactic category for the theory in that doctrine with just the finite limits. And then
then you take pre-sheaves on that.
You take pre-sheaves on that, and the unit embedding cancels out the op, and now you've got double op, so you have no ops. So it's just the set valued functors on the finitely presented algebras. And notice how much bigger this is than the thing we were talking about. Although it could, you know, can we really call it bigger or co-bigger or both bigger and co-bigger? Not going to worry about it too much, but just on a lowbrow level, it just feels much bigger. Because, right, I mean, originally we just had, originally we were just talking about this set valued functors on the category of finite fields, I think, over finite field extensions of F sub P. And that just has, you know, that has relatively few objects. They both have the same infinite, countably infinite number of objects. It's really countably infinite, maybe not. But even though it has an infinite number of objects, it has a very small infinite number of objects, right? There's just F sub P to the 1, there's F sub P to the 2, F sub P to the 3, etc. It just has that list of objects. Whereas if you're listing, if you're just listing the free algebras of free commutative algebras of F sub P, you can list those nicely too. But if you want to list all the finitely presented ones, then I think it's much messier or something like that. It just feels like much, and each individual object is much bigger. So you have the free one on one generator or something like that, and that's a polynomial algebra. So it's not finite. You know, it's finitely presented, but it's not finite. Whereas all these other things are finite fields. So there seems to be something much tamer about the this thing. But there should be some obvious, there should be some obvious geometric morphism between these toposes and an interpretation of theories. And in particular, like I say, the forgetful functor for that very smallish topos that we were talking about, that is a commutative ring object at the very least, or a commutative FP algebra object at the very least, maybe more than that, but it at least starts out being that. And if you think about that by abstract nonsense, that means that we have a geometric interpretation from the syntactic category for the theory of for the geometric theory of a commutative F sub P algebra. So we do have an interpretation going that way, but it's pretty clearly not going to be an invertible interpretation, right? So we don't have a universal model, we just have a model of the theory. But so we know that we have a model of this theory, but we haven't sharpened the theory enough to the point where what we have a model of is the universal model of the theory. But we just have to think of, right? If you've got the thing that you're aiming for, you're trying to make it the classifying topos for something, you're trying to make it possess the universal model of something. You start out with a guess, and the guess has to at least be good enough that there actually is a comparison morphism, a comparison interpretation. And if that comparison interpretation isn't invertible, it's not a universal model yet, you just make another guess interpolating in between. You just add more and more properties or more and more stuff, more and more structure until it works. So I think we already have enough stuff, I'm guessing. And maybe we even have enough structure already. So maybe it really just is extra properties that we need to add. I'd have to check that carefully. But we have this topos that has a commutative FP algebra object in it. I think we probably just have to add more properties to that. Like just add all the properties, whatever the properties are that thing has, just add them all into the theory. And I'm guessing that will pretty much automatically give us a sketch of the theory. And then I'm guessing that most of that would include saying that it's an algebraic extension of F sub P. That would cover a lot of it. I'm not guaranteeing that that's all, but I think that's a lot of it. And I mean, how does that even parse in the theory? So again, I have the feeling that what you're trying to say is something like, for every element, now I'm trying to pretend to use this formal language for geometric logic that some people use or something like that. Some people actually allegedly speak, maybe, where you would say something like, and you have to be careful to give these, not exactly intuitionistic, but geometric interpretations to the quantifiers and the implications and things like stuff like that. But you'd say, for every element in our commutative FP algebra, that element is algebraic. It satisfies a polynomial or something like that. And in order to get that to parse into the theory, I think you have to say something like, you actually have to say, for each element, it's either algebraic of degree 0 or algebraic of degree 1 or algebraic of degree 2 or et cetera, et cetera. And you're allowed to use infinite disjunctions in this doctrine. So that works. I think you can say that. And I think, I think it's easy enough to get it to parse to say that there's a minimal polynomial of degree K. And then by the infinite disjunctions, you can get everything to parse. I have the feeling there might be some obvious thing I'm forgetting, but in principle, I think we can cut this down. We can cut this down. So now there's another topos here, which is something like the topos of semi-simple finite commutative FP algebras. So that would include, right, that would have more cardinalities of models, right? I mean, so like we're doing the F2 algebras, then we have No, maybe that's the same number. Let's see. So what happens? We get all the powers of 2. Is that right?
And then all the ways of summing them. So did you say semi-simple? So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I mean, I don't know if we have like
all the ways to write a number as a product of powers of 2.
I'm getting so mixed up here between products and sums. Like, what if we do like 2 to the 30? Oh, what if 32? How many 32 element semi-simple? Right, so that you could have like f sub 8 Cartesian product f sub 4 is 32.
I think what you do is you take 5 and you write it
partitions,
5 box Young diagrams, and those are the ones.
Something like that. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah.
It's like a logarithmic Young diagram thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, one way to think of what we're doing, I think, right, again, is right. If I mean, I'm sort of trying to exponentiate. I mean, right? We're not working in the. We don't have the zeta thing as an ambient thing now. We don't have the zeta types as an ambient thing now, because that, you know, that doesn't incorporate these non-invertible morphisms between sets.
Mm-hmm.
But there's probably all sorts of ways of getting this to work. What am I trying to say? So yeah, I mean, you could. What if you say something like this? What do you take? Let's go back to saying the geometric theory of a commutative f sub p algebra. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Take the geometric theory of a commutative f sub t algebra, and let's geometric theory of a commutative f sub p algebra. And now let's add a different axiom. Let's add an axiom that tries to say that it should be an integral domain or something like that. Something like that. I mean, right? So an integral domain can't be what? It can't be a Cartesian product or something. Integral domain is stronger than that. But maybe I should just say that see, what am I trying to say here? That see, I mean, sometimes you can get away with saying, if you have an intuitive idea of what a theory is, an intuitive idea of what the models are, then you can just try to say set valued functors on that models on that category on the models, the things that you want to be the models. And then if you're lucky, that will work. If you're lucky, the topos you produce that way, the good topos that you produce that way, will in fact be a theory that has that as the models. Now, that doesn't always quite work. I guess there's this thing called Diaconescu's theorem or something like that, that tells you the gap. But right, I mean, logic would be trivial if this always worked, right? I mean, you know, it's like you would just say, oh, I already know what I want the models to be, so just take the set valued functors on the models, and that would be.
That's for finite. That works for finite limits theories, or limits. They're not finite limits.
Well, I mean, there was already a glitch with the finite limits theories that, you know, the models end up being the arbitrary algebras, but what you put in the cosite is you put just the finitely presented things. Yeah. So that's already part of the glitch between the you know, the original sin of logic. but right, more, that's like a moral ideal that some people at some times would aspire to, that, you know, you don't want to pretend that every topos, every theory is really just set valued functions on the model category. I mean, if you add enough fine print to that, you can maybe you could actually make that true, but it involves a lot of fine print. You have to sort of think variably and everything like that. You know, models in different universes and things like that. Right, so we've got a contrast here, right? So I mean, right, I mean, there's models versus constructions, and there's a big difference between those. And right, I mean, if you say, you can take, I'm trying to say, if you take, right, I'm going to try to leave out all the fine print about finitely presented or finitely anything, whatever. But if you take like sets to the power of x, it's like you're saying the x objects are going to become constructions in your theory. Whereas if you take just sets to the power of x, then it's more like you're going to say that the x objects are models in your theory. So there's this funny interplay, right? And that's what we're dealing with here, right? One of the times we're saying something like, right? Saying this, what am I trying to say? Let's see. All right, okay. Let me try to organize it. A little bit hopeless, but let me try to organize. So, I mean, roughly speaking, right, very roughly speaking, you know, you've got, you know, the models in the site category. The objects in the site category are like the models of the theory. And then when you start imposing sheaf conditions, you're constraining the models. You're sort of getting rid of some of the models. Now, that's a very naive way of thinking about it, and it gets trickier than that as soon as you're dealing with anything with any degree of non-finiteness. So like, what am I trying to say? That, so like one of the things that we want to do here is we want to say something like, well, we're hoping that we've gotten to this point of something like, you know, we had the theory of that we had the theory of not necessarily algebraic extensions of FP. Extension rings, let's say, of FP, perhaps. But maybe we can cut that down to semi-simple commutative rings, and then maybe right. Am I saying this right? Right. You may be able to cut that down to, look, let's just hope somehow we can cut it down to semi-simple ones. And then at that point, you just got finite products of commutative rings. And we're taking set valued functors on that. And that's sounding a lot like the original discussion about zeta types, except we now have these non-invertible morphisms that we're also dealing with.
So why do you want the non-invertible morphisms?
To get our hands on the Frobenius eventually, to get our hands on the Frobenius eventually, and to be able to talk about, to be able to turn these things into motives. So see, we're gonna have a theory. I'm gonna try to get it to be something like what. There's another question you didn't ask, which is why do I want to talk about these non-semi-simple things? What? I mean, I already have the simple ones. Why am I bothering with the non-semi-simple ones? The answer to that question is something like, because I want to have the interplay between the zeta functions and their logarithms. That's a useful interplay. You know, again, you'll have at the logarithm level, you know, the set valued functors on just the field category. You'll have the sum just be pointwise sum or something like that. But then because of this quasi exponentiation relationship, exponentiation versus log relationship between the semi-simple things and the simple things, you get this funny thing that the addition in the semi-simple context versus the simple context, the addition takes on this Dirichlet convolution flavor to it because of the exponentiation relationship between, you know, the exponentiation. So, right, what happens is, I think, am I saying this right? I think I want to say something like that. Exponentiation in this context actually plays the role of the thing that I'm sort of, so it's like you've got a believer in a semi-simple commutative ring, and then you want to add a new belief, which is you want to believe that it's not just semi-simple, you want to believe that it's simple. And what's happening at that point is that these I mean, if we were working in the global context, I want to say something like this is that this belief is going to force these zeta types or things that are like zeta types, force them to become factorizable, Euler factorizable. That's one of the terminologies they use, right? They talk about a factorizable Dirichlet series or something like that. Is that the correct terminology, or is there another terminology? It doesn't matter.
Yep, multiplicative function.
Multiplicative, okay, a multiplicative Dirichlet series.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm trying to get it to work out. I'm not sure I'm saying it right, but I'm trying to get it to work out that multiplicativeness at the categorified level is going to correspond to belief in not just semi-simpleness, but in simpleness, and that the conversion process from this belief will actually automatically become the exponentiation process. And you can tell that this is the conversion process because of the way that it takes some, you know, the conversion process has to preserve the colimit, so it has to take sum to sum, but it's an exponentiation process, so it's taking sum to this Dirichlet convolution thing, I think. So that means the Dirichlet convolution must be the sum, I think. Sorry, I'm being incredibly sloppy here, but my excuse is that we're running out of time. So, I'm trying to get that to work. There's an obvious problem with that, which is that, I mean, multiplicativeness is something that basically just makes sense, if I understand correctly, at the global level, because, you know, it has to do with separate. The multiplicativeness is precisely separating into different factors, whereas this property of being simple versus semi-simple, that makes just as good sense in the local case. So I'm a little bit confused there. I'm screwing something up, but I'm hoping it's going to work out somehow. But so we've got right. So one of the things I was trying to say, one of the things I was also trying to say, well, okay, right. Believing in the right, there's some sort of logical implication between being an integral domain and being simple or something like that. I guess is that right? If you're semi-simple and you're an integral domain, that's equivalent to being simple.
Sounds right.
Sounds close enough to being right for current purposes. So I think we have, I think perhaps we have something like a classifying topos for simple or something like simple extensions of f sub p. Perhaps it's close to being field extensions of f sub p. And right, and then we can cut it down to the algebraic things, and that's just giving us this thing where we just have set valued functors. Hopefully, this thing where we just have set valued functors on the finite fields, including the non-invertible morphisms between the finite fields, the finite fields of characteristic p. But then we'd like to impose further belief on algebraic closedness. And this is right where one of the things happens, right? That kind of this super naive philosophy starts. You can't rely on it anymore, right? This is right where Hermann Weil would start complaining, or somebody would start complaining about, trying to generalize logic from the finite context to the infinite context, and it doesn't really work anymore. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that an algebraic closed thing can't be, an algebraic closed thing can't just be finite dimensional. An algebraic closed extension of f sub p can't be finite dimensional. But if you look at what our topos was, right, we're taking set valued functors on this category of things, all of which were finite dimensional. So it's sort of like we're trying to exclude, right? We're trying to exclude all the things that are only dimension 1 over f, only dimension 1 over fp, only dimension 2 over fp, only dimension 3 over fp. We're trying to exclude all those without excluding everything, because we still want to have right. We want there to be models. We want the theory of algebraically closed algebraic extensions of fp. So we want to somehow believe in that. And now there's something else. There's something else, perhaps even more drastic, that we can believe in. And this is called the double negation topology. And this is where we actually, and I'm not even sure that, believing in this, it might even be that as soon as we believed in this algebraic closedness, algebraically closed algebraic extension of f sub p, I'm a little bit fearful that that might already be a Boolean topos, and that its double negation topology would therefore just be the same as it. But I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Because what I'm hoping is that, I'm actually hoping that if we impose the double negation topology, that we'll get, at the syntactic level, we'll get the topos of finite actions of the profinite Frobenius group of this, profinite version of Z. I think that's what this. I wish I knew this stuff, but I think it's something like the absolute Galois group of f sub p can and or should be thought of as some profinite version of Z.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And at a sort of semi-highbrow level, you can think of that in a Tanakian way by saying that we're just taking the finite actions of Z. And those are the only ones, that qualify as continuous. Or, you know what I mean? They have to be locally finite actions of Z. And so the atomic ones have to be finite. And if I'm not screwing up too badly, those are the only continuous, continuous with respect to the profinite topology, or this particular profinite topology. That would be what we're getting. And Why do I think that's going to happen? Right, because naive, right? That's sort of what's happening at a very naive level, right? I mean, we're trying to, if we didn't impose absolute, if we didn't impose algebraically continuous, then we would have, if we didn't impose algebraically closed, then we would have all these non-closed algebraic extensions of FP and all of different finite degree extensions. And those would be those would be other models, annoying models that we don't really want. What we want is just this one model, and we want, morally, the theory is just torsors of the automorphism group of that one model. Torsors of the, and in this case, it works out to be hopefully torsors, continuous torsors of the pro-finite automorphism group of that one model. And so that one model is this, algebraic closure of F sub P. And it's just got this profinite version of Z as its profinite group, and then the continuous torsors of that profinite group are the models of this theory. And so it's, it should be just like the actions of that theory. And right, and so it's clear that we're getting some I'm hoping that when we stare at this, we'll see that it's clear that we're actually getting some objects in the topos. Again, objects in the topos, I refer to those as constructions. I don't know what other people call them, but the constructions is a sort of good name for them. They're all the things that you can construct from the model. So from the model, you can construct its set of elements. You can construct the projective plane over it, projective line over it, the affine line over it. These are all things that you can construct from it. If you go to this double negation thing, it's going to become very Boolean. The Boolean is going to force the model category to become very like a groupoid. The algebraic closedness, you can force it to be essentially morally just one model, I think. And so we're kind of just getting this very Boolean topos, which is the topos of continuous actions of the profinite Galois group. And that, I think, is just going to be these Artin, well, I was going to say Artin representations or Artin motors, but this is before we're carving up. This is before we're sort of linearizing. So we've after we linearize, we're going to have like vector spaces or something like that. But here we just have sets, basically. So it's going to be something like, it's going to be these zero-dimensional varieties, roughly speaking. I think, yeah. Do I really believe that? I'm hoping that that's going to be these zero-dimensional varieties. And I have it, but somehow included in there was the arbitrary varieties. But I guess what's happening is that they're getting ground up into zero-dimensional dust. I guess that's what's happening. I mean, I didn't think of that till just right now, but I think that's what's happening. I'm hoping what happening is that if you don't impose the double negation topology, but just impose the belief in the algebraic closedness, then I'm hoping that everything won't get ground up into dust. And instead you'll have these other motors or pre-motors, these varieties will be there. So, I mean, one of the things that's going on here is that we're trying to see these varieties as being constructions in a theory. Which I don't know how much I like that philosophy. I mean, that seems to be Grothendieck's and Lovier's philosophy, and maybe that means I should learn what the hell, why they like that philosophy. But why do you want to think of spaces as being constructions in a theory? Or why do you think of constructions in the theory as being spaces? Constructions in a geometric theory as being spaces. I mean, Lovier really talks like that. I think space to him means an object in the topos or something like that. But yeah, so right, we're trying to get some sort of topos, and maybe it's some sort of like big Zariski topos or something like that, where the objects are these constructions that you can build up from, I guess in their version, it's something like a local ring or a Henselian local ring or a Henselian local algebra of a commutative algebra of a particular commutative ring or something like that. And so yeah, I'm hoping, right, I'm hoping that this could be way off, but this is what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that when we examine this topos, we'll see that this is a topos of pre-motives, which are really just varieties of some kind, but they should be a little bit more general than projective varieties. So they should include like non-Hausdorff varieties and things like that. And again, I have a feeling that they're related to. See, now you got me really confused. I assumed, I think it's probably true that you were talking about Emil. All right.
Talking about what?
I thought you were talking about Emil or Emil Arden.
Oh,
But now I'm suddenly theorizing that you're talking about, is there any relationship? Is like they're not related? They're like, there's a guy named Michael Arden or something like that. How do you pronounce the name Arden? What?
I thought they were related.
Maybe they are, but all of a sudden you're making me think that I thought we were talking about Emil Arden and the Arden motives and the Arden representations and the Arden reciprocity theorem and stuff like that. But now you're making me think that this is connected to Michael Arden's stuff, where he talks about Arden spaces or something like that. These things that are like equivalence relations. Yeah, algebraic spaces. Michael Arden invented algebraic spaces. And maybe we
Michael Arden's dad was Emil Arden.
Yeah.
And his older sister was John Tate's wife. How about that?
Older sister's John Tate's wife. Okay. But Michael Arden invented these algebraic spaces, which I think are like, equivalence relations on equivalence relations on affine varieties, and they include projective varieties, but then also include funny non-Hausdorff type things or something like that. I think those will be in our topos too. I mean, I'm sort of, I'm sort of out of time and therefore sort of done, but I hope you almost heard me come to a punchline. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
Well, I finally sort of got what it is you were trying to.
I'm doing a horrible job of explaining it. You're doing a horrible job of explaining it. But these topos are supposed to be topos of pre-motives. Somehow, after you get the pre-motive topos, you somehow carve it up, hopefully, to get the motive abelian category or something like an abelian category or something like that. In particular, right? I mean, so there's one of the things that you do is one of the things that you're trying to tell me about is that there's this simplified version of motives where you fix Q to be a prime, and then you do this very simplified version of motive game. And I'm trying to do that very simplified motivation of the motive game, but I'm trying to do it at the pre-motive level. So I'm trying to describe what this topos might be that we get. And I'm doing a terrible job of explaining it, but that's sort of the game here. And I have much more concrete stuff to try to show you, but I didn't manage to show you any of the concrete stuff, right? I want to show you actual constructions in this theory. I want to see where the sum of these things is really just this categorified Dirichlet convolution. I want to figure out what all these things are. I want to see if it's really working. I want to see if we can really carve these things up into motives, connect them to the vague Q numbers. There's a whole bunch of things I forgot to say. A whole bunch of things I forgot to say. I don't even know what they are, but I can pretty much guarantee that there's a whole bunch of things, even though I can't tell you what they are. There must be a whole bunch of things I forgot to say. So.
Okay, we can try it again or try to continue next
All
time.
right.
I felt like for a long time I was like, didn't know what you're aiming to do with these different topoi, although they seemed like reasonably interesting categories to me. But now, right near the end, like in the last 10 minutes, you revealed what it is you were aiming for.
Yes, but I did such a horrible job of it because somehow, I made it sound like magic. We're adding in these non-invertible morphisms in the site, these connecting homomorphisms between, an extension of degree D and extension of D times E or something like that. And that glue acts as the connecting glue that somehow lets us pretend that we can talk about these infinite degree extensions, which then have the opportunity to satisfy the property of algebraic closedness. And at that point, you can end up formally talking about this profinite Galois group. You can go so far in the belief, you can start, becoming so gullible that you actually believe. That's what the double negation topology is, very gullible. It believes a whole lot of stuff. It believes everything you can believe without becoming inconsistent or something like that. That's like sort of like the vague idea of the double negation topology. So go as far as you can in believing stuff without believing any inconsistencies or something like that. I'm not sure that's right, but it's something like that. Be as gullible as you can without being so dull.
And anything obviously false, right?
Anything obviously self-contradictory. Yeah, something like that. That might be a terrible summary.
Anything that's not false, you think it's true. You're so gullible.
Yeah, it's right. It does have that flavor that anything that could happen does happen or something like that. But it gets tricky when, what happens, what happens when, it seems like there are two things that could happen.
Right. So, well, that's the only difficulty.
Well, I think they become somewhat separated points in the topos, whereas previously they were maybe just glued together or something like that. It becomes more Boolean, more separated, more complementary or something like that.
Yeah, well, I don't get how all that stuff, like you said, it seems semi-magical. I don't get how it's supposed to work, but I'll be glad to hear you try to.
Yeah, I mean,
it does.
Back when we were working without the connecting homomorphisms, I used to try to take our zeta types and I used to try to carve them up into L types. And it just didn't work at all because the L types really need to know about these Frobenius things. And if you don't have those morphisms, those non-invertible, if you don't have those inclusion homomorphisms from the fields to the fields of higher degree, to the extension fields of higher degree, if you don't have those, then it's really hard to talk about the Frobenius and the Frobenius action that the L things are really built out of. These L things that you were talking about, the action of the Frobenius on the Tal cohomology, the thing that has a minimal polynomial that's like a vague Q number or something like that. So yeah, that last thing that I said after overtime, that was a little bit helpful. I mean, to me at least, but I hope it was a little bit helpful to you.
Yeah, it's helpful in getting a feel for what it is you're aiming at.
Yeah,
so
I'm still doing a very bad job, but I hope you can get some sense of where I'm trying to go here. And we're really trying to connect what you're talking about to what I'm talking about. I mean, it's such a struggle to get any connection between what you're talking about and what I'm talking about, but we're really trying at this point. Anything else before we quit here?
Nope, we should just keep at it.
Okay, can I be awake for next time? So you're pretty, at this point, you're pretty good at showing up. And can I actually show up next time? I'll try to, if I have any trouble being awake at the right time, I'll try to let you know as early as possible. But
Okay.
I didn't right, it's actually impressive that I could talk on this little soup. So you should give me extra credit
so
for
that's
that.
why you're so incoherent looking.
Maybe I could use that as an excuse. Okay. Okay, so thanks a lot. That was
Okay,
very helpful.
Yep.
Okay, I'll see you.
Yep, bye.